Today I'm going to be talking about a group called the Guerrilla Girls, which they are an anonymous group of women artists who have made it their mission over the last 35 years to call out sexism, racism, and power within the art world and culture at large. In 1984, the Museum of Modern Art put out a show that was supposed to be a survey of international art entitled An International Survey of Painting and Sculpture. What ended up was that out of 169 artists in the show, 13 of those were women, and even less were artists of color. There was a demonstration in front of the museum, and the reality was that most of the people that were going into the museum didn't really care or notice. The issue was, how can you label a show international survey where 90% of the artists are white males? This is the moment when the Guerrilla Girls knew that they needed to act. So these are some examples of the posters that they created. With subversive postering and protest, this group captivated the streets of New York to try and topple the male-centered art scene. The Guerrilla Girls became notorious in less than a year. So each of them put in money to print off posters to plaster all over New York City in May of 1985. This method is one that got people's attention. So these are some of the examples, as well as the two on the first slide, previous slide, that were placed all around New York City, calling out the MoMA and other institutions as well for limiting the amount of women artists who were shown in their museums and galleries. So this happened in the 1980s, and keep in mind, the second wave of feminism came in the 60s and 70s, and the beginning of the third happened at the beginning of the 1980s. So women had made some gains in other areas in the United States. So why not in gallery showings as well? And this is what the Guerrilla Girls were questioning. The images here are of various posters, the same ones on the two previous slides. It shows them plastered on the door, the way that they were placed. And it's hard to avoid looking at them or reading them as you're entering this building. And this is what got the attention of people, that they needed to get their message out. One of the ways that artist work gets recognized is by the art world and by the public through the critics who write about and talk about artists. In this particular poster, they are calling out critics for not talking about women artists and artists of color. When they do not, there's a lack of awareness. So one of the questions that you might be asking is, why did this group become so well known in such a short amount of time? Well, while others had been less successful. And according to Stephanie Rainier, the answer is the Guerrilla Girls came in a thriving period of activism and performance with a combination of elements that the art world could not ignore. They did performance, they did public caricature, anonymity was a big part of it, playfulness, satire, and honest statistics and facts. Critics, scholars, and curators today, including those who were mocked in early posters, such as Mary Boone, state that the Guerrilla Girls were catalysts for change in the artistic community of the 1980s. So the Guerrilla Girls were feminist activist artists. They wore gorilla masks in public, using facts and humor, outrageous visuals to expose gender and ethnic bias, as well as corruption in politics, art, film, and pop culture. Their anonymity keeps the focus on the issues and away from who they might be. They could be anyone. They could be anywhere. They believe in what's called intersectional feminism that fights discrimination and supports human rights for all people and all genders. They undermine the idea of a mainstream narrative by revealing the understory, the subtext, the overlooked, and the downright unfair. They have done hundreds of projects. There's several posters here that I've already shown. They've had actions, books that they've written that I'll show later, some videos, stickers, and they've shown all over the world. They also do interventions and exhibitions at museums, blasting these same museums on their own walls for their bad behavior and discriminatory practices. even calling out newspaper editors who think that it's getting better for women artists, calling out corporations as well who hire predominantly white males, calling out government officials and senators, as they do here with Senator Helms, using sarcasm as well about the advantages of being a woman artist and what it's really getting down to. So, what's important to note about much of their work that I've shown so far is the typeface that they're using. So the Futura typeface was created by Paul Rainier in 1927. He lived in Germany, and while he wasn't a part of the Bauhaus, his ideas align closely with those associated with the Bauhaus, who worked there and were students there. Futura then became a commercial font, and it was used quite often because it had simple geometry. We have the triangle and the square, and it really was a typeface that represented the industrial age. What Rainier wanted to do was to strip away all ornament. And much like Helvetica, Futura became the typeface that found its way into logos and advertising. And by the 1980s, it had become what some called ubiquitous, especially in advertising and corporate identity. There are even some that called for a boycott of the typeface. So companies like Nike and Absolut Vodka used Futura in many of their ads, as well as Volkswagen. Douglas Thomas, in the article How Feminist Artists Reclaim Futura from New York's Mad Men, points out that when you think about the Mad Men era, where advertising was used to target women in a very stereotypical housewife type of way, it is important to note why the Guerrilla Girls use this typeface in their posters and on their billboards. So they use the Futura Extra Bold Condensed and geared toward a wide mass-marketed audience. And like advertising does, the Guerrilla Girls wanted to be provocative and were creating posters and billboards, which were the common medium for advertising. And they were meant to be disposable, just like advertising is, using titles like When Racism and Sexism Are No Longer Fashionable, What Will Your Art Collection Be Worth? And Do Women Have to Be Naked to Get into the Met Museum? This particular image here was used on billboards. It's still used today. They went to question this idea of why women have to be naked to get into the museum, calling out the objectification of women and not viewing them as serious artists, but rather objects of the male gaze of other male artists. Now, this became a controversial image here. They continued to use the Futura typeface. The use of a billboard as a means of advertising was the next logical step in their movement to bring attention to the issues of a lack of female artists showing their work in museums and galleries. The billboard is still used today in this version, and there's another version that I'll show later on. But actually, the number for 1989 was less than 3% of artists in the modern art section are women, but 85% of the nudes are female. And now in 2020, it's only 5%. That says a lot about how important it is that these women are still advocating for this idea. So over the years, the members of the group have changed, but one part of this stays the same, and that is their anonymity. They all wear a mask in public, a gorilla mask, and take on pseudonyms of famous female artists. When they are in public, they keep their anonymity as artists so they can continue to make their own work. And being anonymous allows them to speak out with feeling as if they need to justify who they are and what they are doing. So their numbers are from anywhere from 3 to 50 at any given time over the last 35 years. Of course, people have tried to figure out who they are, who has been in the group, who currently is in the group. And this particular list was created by the group to mock and call attention to those who think they have an idea of who their members are. This, of course, is not a real list. Again, we have the use of the Futura typeface, and in reality, we don't know if any of these women are graphic designers in their personal art practice. But what we can tell is they know design and they know how to use it. The first posters they created in the 80s were simple, but over time they began to get more and more complex. The next several slides show this and indicate how much more involved the work became and how it grew to be more than a discussion about women artists being excluded from museums and galleries, to how women were treated in many facets of life in the United States and around the world. So here are some examples of work they created much later on after their initial posters. They continued to use the Futura typeface and the Futura typeface family. But you see new formats of how they present the material. This one on the left is called a pop quiz. It says if February is Black History Month, March is Women's History Month, what happens the rest of the year? Answer, discrimination. You begin to see new formats of how they're presenting this material, and this is important because they're getting at other ideas and they're speaking to other formats of ways of presenting this information. They also have on the right a definition of a hypocrite. So they're continuing to use the posters to reach a mass-wide audience, which is what advertising attempts to do. So here's a kind of like a scorecard about galleries in New York and how many women and artists of color are shown in these particular galleries. This particular image here is from something they call Hot Flashes. It was a journal that they created in the 1990s. They were awarded a National Endowment for the Arts, and they were given a grant to do a feminist watchdog journal. Again, the journal is another way to reach a large number of people using a type of medium that is a little bit more disposable, like the billboards and like the posters. But here again, they're calling out the New York Times Magazine for showing all men as the art world all-stars on this particular page of the journal itself. Another issue that they point out is the male-dominated art world at universities, who is hired in these different departments, male-dominated, white male-dominated art departments. Some more posters here, getting more involved and more information in different ways with different kinds of lists, top 10 list, the graph as well, calling out, again, Newt Gingrich. In 2000, they began also calling out sexism in Hollywood as well. These are some posters that do this. They use a variety of formats, such as the known images, the television, and the Oscar award, kind of augmented. Lists, graphs, stats, question, answer, and so forth. And so they're pointing out what is obvious to those already in the industry, but not necessarily the general public. They continue to use the billboard format, calling out museums for not paying their employees appropriate living wages, but yet using their money to construct buildings and so forth. And the one on the right, again, calling out Hollywood and how they portray women in television and film. Here are some more posters, billboards. The one in the middle and the top is a light show, a tabloid type of magazine. On the far left, top one is the Homeland Terror Alert System for Women, talking about, different aspects of what the president has said. One in the middle, New format of the pop quiz, when the answer is discrimination, adding more to that list. The one on the right is a poster just down the street from the actual MoMA calling out donors with ties to Jeffrey Epstein and people who are on the board that they have a problem with. So they're not afraid to call people out. And their anonymity really helps with that. In 2005, they began to use their platform in other places out of the side of the US, just China, of course, using the Chinese characters here, Turkey, Ireland, and in Mexico as well, continuing in some places to use that Futura typeface. In 2005, the focus has always been about art, but they realized that issues about how women are viewed and treated was a culture problem. They're calling out the music industry as well, using that familiar format of the billboard about women being naked. This time, do women have to get naked to be in music videos? And then it says, well, 99% of the guys are dressed. And then, broadening their conscience of the art world into a conscience of culture. They even had a billboard up this past year about voting and democracy. What is democracy? This was posted in, the particular one was in West Virginia as a part of For Freedoms, the 2020 Awakening Project. Asking the urgent question about democracy. What does it mean in our culture? They also have gone from using more disposable mediums such as posters and billboards to books. So this particular book is called The Guerrilla Girls Bedside Companion to the History of Western Art. They say taking a romp through the last 2,000 years of Western art with the Guerrilla Girls as your guide. You can read about the fascinating lives of women artists who were able to make it despite incredible social obstacles and sexist art historians. Art history classes around the world are using it as a textbook. So they really talk about, what females have been able to push through the art world that is very male dominated and very white male dominated. This book is called Bitches, Bimbos, and Ball Breakers. They write, thinking about film and pop culture drove us to investigate female stereotypes. How are they born? How do they evolve? How can you escape them? And so really thinking about how do these stereotypes come about? How do we view women? Where does that idea come from? Here is their art museum activity book. Long time ago, rich people had lots of art, and then they decided to put them somewhere else besides their homes, and they started museums. So while the Guerrilla Girls love museums and all the art in them, they worry about what is being shown. So museums often sell books to teach kids how to appreciate art. So they wrote a book to teach adults how to criticize museums and how to look at what is in the museum and why decisions are made about who gets to be in the museum. So they have fought against, of course, racism, sexism, and they're currently railing against the billionaire art collectors who perpetuate the exclusion of women and minorities. This particular video, for some reason, it's not showing up here, but they were invited to speak on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert about their work and its significance to the art world. It's a great interview with three of the current Guerrilla Girls. I encourage you to watch it. I won't show it here, but please do watch it. It's a great interview, each of them talking about the art world and their role as being advocates for female and people of color in the art world. So these posters here continue with the idea that those that have the power make the choices about whose work is placed in galleries and museums. The poster on the right isn't using the Futura typeface. Rather, it's a cursive handwriting from one of the members. They're writing what I'll call a love letter. That's how they sign it, with all our love, to art collectors. So 1985, they started doing this. They've been doing it a lot more recently because there are gallery owners who are predominantly white and make the decisions of who gets shown. So the other poster is from 2016, discusses one of the biggest issues facing non-white male artists, and that's these billionaire art collectors who only show art by white males. Their most recent project is a book that was released this year that showcases a large collection of their work over the past 35 years. Some of their posters are in here, photos of them protesting, photos of their work in galleries, and so forth. So it's a very interesting book if you're interested more in finding out about their work. They also have a website. So why are they still advocating? This is the progress that has been made. You can see between these two posters over the last 30 years, and it's probably not changed much since 2015. This is why they're still creating these posters, billboards, why they are writing books, making videos, using journals, and so forth. And to help people who are in power disrupt the status quo. The mediums they use are often disposable, such as the posters and the billboards, but also reach the widest audiences, like advertising. They continue to use the Futura typeface because of its history of being used for, the patriarchal advertising that stereotypes women. They have branched out to other art forms and other typefaces, but the poster and billboard reach the most amount of people. So I'll leave you with this last slide, and they're really asking people. They're asking dealers, curators, collectors, museum goers, anybody who needs to call out these museums and ask them to show more women artists, whether it's a gallery or a museum, show more people of color to represent the whole of society. So what's next for them is more creative complaining, more interventions, and more resistance. Thank you.